Repeating a habit for 10,000 hours won't make you an expert. In fact, automation can actually freeze your progress. Today, we're breaking the automation plateau to build a system and an identity that never stop evolving.
New section, continuing to show up. Once you successfully develop a habit, how do you ensure that it continues working for you long-term? In this section, we'll discuss the 3 major potential downsides of creating habits, and the strategies Clear recommends for combating these downsides. How to prevent boredom. Make behaviors harder. Clear contends that one potential downside with creating a habit is that you may grow bored. This is because boredom is inevitable with any repeated activity. At some point, your motivation for your new habit may wane. When this happens, it's easy to abandon new behaviors that are still working to find more exciting behaviors. Note: if you can push through the boredom of doing a habit you've grown accustomed to, you might experience some unexpected benefits. Letting your mind wander during boring tasks has several benefits, like boosting creativity. Clear contends that making behaviors harder can help curb boredom. This is because your brain remains engaged and motivated to improve when it feels challenged. But the level of challenge is crucial. You should make the behavior just hard enough to be interesting, but easy enough that you can still do it. If the challenge is too easy, you'll lose interest. If it's too hard, you'll grow frustrated and give up. Note: what if you're bored by a behavior you can't reasonably make harder? Keep things exciting by introducing a fun new element. For example, make your healthy breakfast habit more fun by cooking your eggs in a humorously shaped pan. How difficult should it be? Clear suggests ensuring you succeed half the time. This way, you'll experience enough success to warrant continued action and enough failure to make you work harder. Rewards experienced in this intermittent way make every attempt novel, which reduces boredom. Note: if you've ever struggled to not look at your phone, you've already experienced how intermittent rewards can create powerful habits. In Digital Minimalism, productivity expert Cal Newport describes how many technological products, like our phones, are designed to provide intermittent rewards so that we continue using them. How to keep progressing. Build on momentum. Clear contends that a second potential downside with creating habits is that you may stop progressing. This becomes an issue when you're using habits to automate certain behaviors you need to reach a long-term goal, like if you're mastering scales because you eventually want to master the piano. Habits can prevent you from progressing, Clear explains, because once you automate a behavior, you stop paying close attention to it and start to miss small mistakes. You still think you're making progress because you're putting in the reps, but you're only reinforcing your bad habit. For example, once you've learned your scales, you might play them at the beginning of every piano practice and assume you're making progress. But since you're no longer focused on your scales, you don't realize that you're playing them at an inconsistent volume. So each time you run scales, you reinforce the habit of playing them at an inconsistent volume. Unless your actions change, you won't grow how you want. Note: the popularity of New York Times bestseller Outliers may partially explain why people believe that repeating a behavior is enough to progress in it. In his book, Malcolm Gladwell popularized the 10,000-hour rule, which stated that anybody who practices a skill for 10,000 hours can become an expert in it. But in Peak, author and psychologist Anders Ericsson, who wrote the study Gladwell based his rule on, refuted this rule, noting that how you practice is much more important than how much you practice. You can ensure you keep progressing by building momentum into your system. Once a behavior becomes automated, Clear recommends building on it with 1% improvements. This keeps your behavior novel and your progress continuous, and thus prevents you from getting stuck. For example, If you're trying to master the piano, don't just run scales once you're comfortable playing them. Improve this ability by adjusting your volume as you play the scale. Note: in the compound effect, Darren Hardy also recommends shaking up your routine if your habits aren't leading to progress. But he contends that changing your routine is enough to liven things up and help you recapture your passions. You don't necessarily have to improve it. How to continue evolving. Craft an adaptable identity. Clear contends that a third potential downside with creating habits is that you can grow too attached to the identity they represent. This can make evolving past that identity difficult because if you lose that identity for any reason, you'll lose both yourself and motivation. For example, if you have a habit of studying every day and thus identify as a good student, who are you when you graduate? Note: in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, author Mark Manson elaborates on how growing attached to a particular identity prevents you from evolving. He contends that people avoid changes that could improve their lives because these changes challenge their identity and push them out of their comfort zone. To avoid losing yourself, Clear recommends, think of yourself in terms of characteristics instead of labels. When you identify with multiple characteristics instead of one label, your identity remains adaptable. For example, I'm a good student becomes I'm someone who invests in learning. You can still be that after graduation. In this way, an adaptable identity allows you to continue beneficial habits even as the circumstances of your life inevitably change. For example, someone who invests in learning still reads regularly about their field, but a good student stops reading after graduation. An adaptable identity goes with the flow of life. A label-based identity fights against it. Note: just be careful what characteristics you use to define yourself. In Awaken the Giant Within, Robbins warns that tying your identity to anything likely to change will likely trigger an identity crisis in the future. So, I'm friendly is a better characteristic to define yourself by than I'm popular, since popularity often fluctuates. New section. Looking forward. Continue to reflect and adjust. Clear contends that habit formation does not end once you build the habit. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for cues and ways to automate behavior. Therefore, you need to continually check in with your identity and behaviors to ensure they're still working for you. So, Clear recommends reflect on your habits and progress, and look for areas that promote growth and areas that require refinement. The more small adjustments in behavior you make, the more likely you will end up on the path of your choosing. You can become anyone you want and reach any goal you desire if you work hard and remain aware of the life you're leading. Note: you can only effectively reflect on your habits and progress if you're able to admit when you're failing and take that failure into stride. In Make Your Bed, retired Navy SEAL Admiral William H. McRaven shows how to do so. Instead of giving up when you fail, use failure to push yourself harder and grow stronger. For example, during SEAL training, McRaven continually performed poorly on a swimming test and had to endure extra training as a result. But this training made him stronger, and McRaven eventually became the fastest swimmer in his cohort.
We have now mastered the foundation of atomic habits, from the power of identity and systems to the 4 laws that drive human behavior. This concludes our Big Picture series. The high-level blueprint is now complete. But the journey is just beginning. Join me in the Deep Analysis series for a chapter-by-chapter breakdown where we use practical exercises and step-by-step methods to rebuild your life from the ground up.